Hello everyone and welcome to this very special session that we've got with Andy Ransom, CEO of Rentokil Initial. Now you'll have read his impressive bio in the notes, so I'm not going to repeat all of that, but I would like, just to give a little bit of a more human flavour to the session, I'd like to ask Andy if he could reveal something that maybe you don't know about him yet. So Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, that's a great first question, isn't it? I'll reveal two things. You can decide whether either are interesting or revealing. The first one, I failed chemistry O-level at school, and then I had a 20-year career at ICI, which was Britain's largest chemical company, and I never told them. Managed to style it out for 20 years, not understanding most of what they were talking about. So that's one I've kept quiet. The other one, to the embarrassment of my kids in particular, I'm a massive Taylor Swift fan. And during 2020 lockdown, Spotify sent out details of who had listened to more Taylor Swift tracks during 2020 than anyone else, and I came in the top 1% of the global population. So not sure it's something to be proud about, but it's a fact, so there you go.
Very good. Well, I have to confess I have been to see her at the O2 myself, so I'm not going to, I'm quite impressed by that statistic, actually.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
Fantastic.
Well, Andy, can you tell us just a little bit of background? So Rentokil pre-pandemic, what was going on? How was it?
Well, I don't know whether everyone knows much about Rentokil Initial, but the company's been going 100 years, and it's one of the few, FTSE companies that's been around seemingly forever. We're essentially two things. We're the world's largest pest control company. And pest control, this is everyone's favourite subject, certainly when I get to a dinner party back in the day when we used to have those things. Everyone's got a pest story. So it's the most wonderful business. We deal with rats, mice, cockroaches, bed bugs. People normally start scratching at this point. And we do it globally. We do it in 86 countries around the world. We've got 44,500 colleagues delivering services across the world. And as I say, it's just the most magnificent business. And in an industry that has continued to grow, and it's driven by things like global warming, the heating of the planet, which it's changed the breeding cycle of insects. It's driven by movement of people into the middle classes in the emerging markets. It's just a great business. Our other business is hygiene, which we'll come back to, I'm sure. And hygiene, since the 1890s, really has been a washroom business for us. And everything you would imagine in the washroom, we take care of. So soaps, papers, baby changing tables, air fresh, hand drying, all of those things. It's a service business. And there we were in about 45 countries before the pandemic started. So global business, really a people business, and a business that has had really good success in the last few years. We've gone from, what were we, about 170 in the FTSE to about 50 over the last 5 years. So it's been a growing business. It's been growing organically, and we've been doing maybe 40 acquisitions a year for the last 5-6 years. So it was going great. In fact, extremely well, right up to February last year.
Interesting. Now, I'm tempted to share a few pest stories, actually. You've got me going, but I won't, because what I'd love to hear now is what has happened over the last 15 months or so? What changes have you noticed in your markets, in your products?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gone in a few phases, to be honest, because it started, I remember it all kicked off, it was about January last year, and I saw an article in social media, I think it was, about this virus in China, and I pinged an email to my Asia team and said, have a look at this, what's going on. And to be quite honest, I was looking at it as, is this a business opportunity? Because when we had SARS and when we've had other big problems, it's tended to drive some activity on the hygiene side of the business. So back in January, it was just a sort of polite inquiry to my business. Come February, we could see in our Chinese business, and then our Hong Kong, then our Taiwanese, then our South Korean, then Malaysia, Singapore, we could see it moving, and moving very, very quickly. And then, of course, by March time, it was Italy, it was Spain, it was the United Kingdom, and so on. In the first wave of that activity, in terms of the impact on the business, it was very fast and it was very profound, because, as you'd imagine, as economies and markets shut down, so did our customers. And so overnight, I think it was April last year, in some of our markets, we lost something like 40% of our revenue. And so it was pretty dramatic. So in that sense, it was a real crisis moment. It was a real moment of concern for all of the colleagues around the world. What does it mean? What does it mean for the business? What does it mean for them? And we moved from that phase, which was full-blown crisis management, and gradually started to look into, okay, well, there will be another side to this. We will get through this. And where is the business opportunity for us? So in the white heat of the crisis, and we learnt this from our Chinese business first, there was a need for disinfection services. There was a need for surfaces to be cleaned. And at that time, the main concern, the spread of the virus, was in fact surface contamination. It moved later to aerosols. But so at that time, we realised we had a small business in the UK that already did disinfection services. So over the course of 4 weeks, we trained 7,000 people across 60 countries, all remotely, all through video training in multiple languages, to train them in the technical aspects of providing this disinfection service. In that same 4 weeks, we had to find PPE for thousands of people when there was a global shortage of PPE, and we were certain we were not going to take PPE that would have gone to hospitals, so we had to source it from other sources. We had to get the materials, we had to do the training, we had to win the customers, and we pivoted like I've never seen before into those additional services, into that hygiene space. And thank goodness we did, because it was a real hit to our core business over the next few months. And the movement into the disinfection services, in the end, in 2020, we did 225 million revenue in a service that we didn't even do until April of last year. So big impact in the short to medium term on our core business, but also opened up some opportunities for us to try and be part of the response to the global pandemic.
Absolutely amazing in 4 weeks to have gone through that, and as you've described, really complex, all those different people, different languages. And nice to hear also that you were ensuring that the PPE wasn't being taken away from the health services. Really very good. But that tells me, and you said earlier, of course, it is a very people-focused business. And you kindly did an interview with us for the Treasury recently, and you talked about the 3 C's of collaboration, communication, and culture, which are all around people. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And I'd encourage our audience, do read that article if you've not read it yet. But could you tell us a little bit more now?
A little advert there. Yeah, look, you absolutely summed it up. So mine is a business services organisation, and it's all about the people. So we've got this thing, I call it the machine, and it's a simple model, really. But it's a series of interlocking cogs. It's how the business works. And the big cog at the top of this model is people. And the theory goes something like this, that if you can get your people engaged, inspired, if you can get them out of bed in the morning to come to work and do a great day's work and do it willingly and happily and deliver great customer service, then each of the other cogs will turn. So great employees and happy, engaged employees deliver great customer service. Great customer service means people buy more things from us, they take price increases, they pay their bills. We take that cash, we reinvest it into training, into technology, into M&A. That all goes around this flywheel. If you can't get that first cog moving in a business services company, if you can't get that engagement, then it doesn't matter how good your plan is or your strategy is or your tactics, you can't actually make it happen. So we've really invested a lot of time and effort in that first cog in employees, which is all about culture. It's all about creating that culture. We call it our Employer of Choice program because fundamentally, yes, we want to be a great employer, but if we can keep and engage employees and keep them for longer, then we know that good things happen. So the fact that we had invested so much time, effort, love, if you like, into the culture of the organisation really held us in great stead when the crisis came, because we knew we had a strong culture. We knew that our people would support us, but it also meant we had a huge responsibility to the organisation, because you can create a culture, and it takes a long time to create a strong culture, but you can destroy it very quickly. Yeah. There's a massive moment of trust between management and the organisation. Would we do the right things in this crisis, or would we just do what a lot of other companies did, which was just cut and reduce headcount, etc. And right at the beginning of the crisis, I said to my team, you know, we've actually got two theoretical choices to respond here. One is we can take significant cost out of the organisation by laying off people and making mass redundancies, or we can share in the pain and we can all take a share of that and do our very best to bring everyone through the crisis. And there wasn't much of a discussion. It was a no-brainer for us. That's what we would do. And that's what we did. And in the end, I had to ask 2,000 management colleagues, would they accept a pay cut? And I had to ask, and they had to sign to accept it. Every single one, without exception. I didn't have a single person say, no, we're not going to do that. And that was that's the power of culture. In terms of collaboration, the best example I can give you, I'm not a big fan of meetings. I've always been, you know, there can be a lot of waste of time if you're not careful with meetings. So I've run the business with 4 to 5 meetings a year of my executive team. I bring them together from around the world for a week, 4 times a year. Well, we moved from that cadence of management meetings. When the crisis hit, we went to 3 a week. And in that meeting, in that virtual meeting, we've been a virtual company for a decade working with Google, so it was an easy transition for us. But we said, right, on Mondays, we are only going to talk about crisis. Get it all off your chest. Tell us all the terrible things that you're confronting and what you need to do. Monday's about crisis. Wednesday is about recovery. Don't be bringing crisis into the room on a Wednesday. We've done crisis on Monday. Wednesday, we have to keep our thoughts totally focused on what are we doing to bring ourselves through and to recover. And then Thursday, we went to strategy, which is, okay, what's the strategic response? And we moved to this from, it was the second week in April. We moved to weekly board meetings. So this change in the way that we were working as a team was really powerful. We went from structured, long, tedious, day-long meetings with agendas and action points and minutes to no agendas, no minutes, no action points, short meetings. Every single person on every call speaks every time without exception. Cameras on, couple of hours, and we've moved now to we don't need the crisis, thankfully. We don't need the recovery. We don't need to separate strategy. So we now do that once a fortnight, and we've kept the same method, and it's been absolute fabulous example of collaboration. And what we found from that was we could see what was happening in different parts of the world. So we could see what was happening in China, both when it went into the crisis, but also as it began to emerge first time out of lockdown. And we could learn from that. And I think my experience at Rentokil Initial has always been a great sharer of best practice, but has been a pretty poor copier. You know, everyone's always willing, I'll give you my brilliant idea, and everyone shares their brilliant idea, and we all go out of the room thinking our idea was better than the other one. In this moment, we found that people were not only willing to share, they were desperate to copy and to, oh, that's worked in China, that's worked in Hong Kong, that's working in Italy. And we got more collaboration and openness and transparency and trust over that period than I've ever seen. And the other C was comms, communication. If you ever do employee surveys, they always come back with, certainly in my experience, probably me, I don't know, in the top 3 of negatives is always communication. You think, well, we're amazing at communication, we do so much, but it's always still, you can never over-communicate. So our approach to comms really has been, we use the same language inside the company as outside the company. We don't have one set of sound bites for the investors and the shareholders and the analysts. We talk in plain English, we're down to earth, and we communicate a lot. We use internal social media channels, and we were making sure that the message was getting out right down the organisation. A lot of companies did a sort of weekly blog from the CEO. My view was, my people don't want to hear from me. They don't want to hear from me. They want to hear from their manager. They want to hear from their local boss as to what's going on. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my business? People are very concerned about their livelihoods, their jobs, their health, their benefits, all of that, and they needed to hear from people. So local comms and frequency, we had to furlough people in a number of countries, but we spoke to them all the time. We didn't make them feel like there was 2 classes of colleagues, those that were not furloughed and those that were. We brought them into the team meeting environment. So I think they're all part of culture really, but in a business services, it's the most critical part, and what we saw was the payback for the investment we've made for the last few years in trying to be that good employer. And right at the beginning of the crisis, I said to my team, you will all be judged on this in a few months or even a year or two's time. Can you honestly say at the end of this that you've had a good crisis? And by a good crisis, I mean, can you look your employees, your colleagues in the eye and feel that you did the right thing at the time for them? And that was the test that I set to the team, and it passed that test brilliantly.
Well, thank you. So there's some wonderful examples of things that you've done in Rentokil Initial that I hope some of our audience, you'll be able to emulate, because there's some brilliant ideas there that you've actually put into action. And I liked, you used the word love at one point, and that was really interesting, because so many people shy away from that word, but it is about that, and people pulling together, and trust you mentioned as well, so absolutely brilliant. In terms of that transition into the pandemic, was it very smooth, or what were the challenges you faced through that period?
I think it's one of those you look back and you probably say, no, well, that was quite smooth. We handled that quite well. At the time, I don't think it really felt particularly smooth. I think my own response, when bad things happen, I sort of curl up in a ball for the first 2 days and sort of, metaphorically rock in the corner a little bit and think, okay, this is bad things are happening here. And my response is always the same. I start to come out of that pretty quickly with, okay, so what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Let's get action oriented. And that's really what the organisation did. It took a moment to say, okay, this is serious. This is real. This is a huge problem. But what are we going to do about it? Once we got into that action orientation, clear that what we needed to do, it became smoother. I mentioned we've been a sort of virtual company for 10 years. Google tell us that we're second only to Google themselves in use of their Hangouts, which was a sort of precursor to Teams and Zoom. We've been using those for years. So our transition to remote working was actually very easy. But the challenge I think we had in 86 countries was that the 86 countries, the governments, and in fact the states in the United States, were all moving at a different speed and reacting in different ways in terms of how they locked down, when they locked down, what the implications were. We had, one of the big first challenges for us was to convince governments that we were a vital service, that pest control was a critical service, and if you didn't continue to do pest control through the crisis, we'd have another crisis. But we had to do that one by one, and in the case of the United States, we had to go to the state authorities. So that wasn't a given that we would be allowed to continue to work, and so that was a big challenge. I mentioned the PPE, the sourcing of products. All the things that go with economy shutting down. Did we have money in the right places? Were we going to get paid the money that was owed to us? So a lot of detail and complexity, but the fact that we had this strong culture, the fact that we had been working virtually for a number of years, those definitely made it feel easier than it really was.
Interesting. You mentioned about rocking in the corner, thinking, and then quickly kind of recovering.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you mind sharing, where do you do your best thinking? Some people say things come to them in the shower or on a run or a walk or in the office or with other people. Where do you, when you really need to think about something, how do you do that? Where do you do that?
Yeah, to be honest, it depends a little bit. It's interesting you mentioned running. I run Saturdays and Sundays, and my team dread it when I go for a long run because they know that they're going to get a load of emails afterwards. Go, oh yeah, I could do that, I could do that. Lots of notes. I'm sure it's my personality type. I'm never really off. That's the big problem, and I won't say it's the job. I think it's me. I'm never really off. So the brain's always constantly going, even when I'm sat on a beach. Back in the days when we did holidays, so my best thinking probably if I'm on a run or on the bike or something, and I clear my head and I get lots of creative juices. Yeah. They're not necessarily my best ideas, but they are my most creative ideas. I get quite a bit out of team, sharing a problem and trying to shoot it down amongst us. But to be honest, my process is I worry the issue to death. If I got an issue, I will really scratch away at it and keep thinking, and then I'll start to sort of, okay, I could do this, I could do this. And the minute I've started to articulate what the idea is, then I've moved out of the problem solving into the now the action comes. But probably running on the weekends. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that. Now, Treasury. What role has Treasury played during the crisis, and have you seen any evolution there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always had a good relationship with Treasury, but I suppose I would be, I've already told you I don't like meetings, so I would be meeting Treasury 4 times a year prior to the crisis. I've got a great treasurer, and she'd do a review, all the things that I was interested in, lots of KPIs, lots of data, lots of forward-looking stuff, lots of ideas about what we could do. Always a good quality meeting, but 4 times a year. And as long as there's no crisis, carry on, that's fine. I don't need to see you more frequently than that. When all of this started to, the walls started moving in, what I did was to ask the treasurer and the head of M&A, who previously up to that point had been furiously busy and then suddenly had nothing to do because we were not doing any deals through the crisis. I got the 2 of them to do a lot of stress testing and a lot of black hat modelling, dark scenarios. What would happen if mentioned we lost 40% revenue in some of our businesses in the first month. Well, what would that look like if we had it for 6 months? And so a lot of intensive, dark and really quite depressing modelling. But then the challenge was, okay, no matter how dark we can make this model, have we got a solution for how we would trade our way out of it? And so that bit of, a lot of people talk about risk registers and business continuity plans, and I've never seen one yet that actually is any use to you in a real crisis. No, when the crisis happens, nobody's looking around for the risk register or the BCP. So this was real world crisis stuff, and the Treasury team were brilliant in terms of, well, these are the options, these are the consequences. We called down the RCF. We've never done that in the history of the group. We were one of the first in the queue for the CCFF. I think we were the first. We had no CP program, so we had to create one of those. I think we were the first in line after that. We got 86 countries, and Lord knows how many bank accounts, a lot more than 86, and we needed to make sure that we didn't run out of money in any of those markets. And as I said, they're all going up and down at different rates. We moved to a rolling 13-week cash flow. We'd never had that before. We'd never needed it before, but now we needed it. We've kept that going. That's sort of been a useful, cash in my company, like most, I suppose, is always really difficult to predict. We've got a lot better at it actually through this. We moved, part of the work from home, we moved all of our cash collectors to their front rooms. Our cash collection performance went up in a global pandemic. So I think what did the crisis tell us at Treasury? We had a really good team. We had good processes. There was no panic when it all started going very challenging. But it was good to see that professionalism and here, it was very calm, and here's the depressing scenario number one you've asked for, and here's the depressing scenario number two, and this is what we would do about it. And it was really powerful and incredibly helpful to the board in particular to know that under all scenarios we still survived. We had an answer to the black hat scenarios, and that was really, really helpful. Obviously, keeping in contact with our banks, with our funders, with rating agencies. There was a lot more intensity to that. But I tell you, as I said, we've gone to weekly board meetings. Those materials from Treasury, in terms of the scenarios, were incredibly important in that phase, so we could communicate to our board, this is why we're doing what we're doing, this is why we say what we're saying. We had to put out, like everyone else did, I guess, an RNS that said we can't give guidance to the market at this point. See the share price reaction as a result, of course. But to give that statement, we had to be really clear, what the cash implications were for the company. So we did a lot of things at that time that Treasury were right in the middle of. We suspended the dividend, we stopped M&A, we found 100 million of cost savings. But all at the same time, we said, we're not going to be the guys that don't pay our bills. We're going to pay our bills. In fact, rather than just pay them, we said for small guys, we need to make sure that we're part of the solution, not part of the problem. So I think overall, Treasury really earned their spurs in that crisis, and as a result, I got a lot of confidence. There will be another crisis sometime. It doesn't necessarily be a pandemic. There'll be problems down the road, and it's really good to know that your team have the resilience and the processes in place to know how to deal with them.
Oh, that sounds like a great deal of work's been going on. And it's lovely to hear from the CEO that the Treasury team is so valued. And you mentioned also about remaining calm, and I think that's one of the key things in crises, isn't it? To remain calm, because you can't think straight if you're in a panic. So it's great to hear all of that. And you mentioned as well people from home bringing in more money. What are your plans in the future coming out of the pandemic, before the next one? Are you going to have a different way of working in the future, more hybrid working, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I'll give you today's answer. If you ask me again in a couple of years, it might be a different one. I've got a side bet with someone that it will be different in 2 years. But for the time being, I mean, we back to comms and back to culture. We certainly in this country, we've gone out to our office-based employees. Most of our employees are in the field, so it's can't do pest control working from your home, and not very easily. So we've asked them, would you A, rather be in the office all the time, B, be at home all the time, or C, split between some at home, some in the office, and I forget what the number was, but a very, very, very high percentage said C, which is a no-brainer really. And I've always felt that I've always allowed my teams to work from home because the nature of work has changed so much. The fact that certainly in a global business, you're constantly on. It's 24/7. You'll get emails coming in from all around the world, and there has to be a trade-off. And the trade-off for my people is do whatever you need to do. You don't need to tell me you're going to the school sports day or playing golf. It doesn't matter. Do whatever you need to do, because you're going to get an email from me on a Saturday morning after I finish my 10K run. You're going to get and I actually really do kind of want it answered. So I'm not saying that we're perfect at that. We've asked our people, what would you like to do? And they've said, yeah, look, ideally, we'd like to do 1 or 2 days in the office and 3 or 4 at home. And I've said that actually that works for us. So we've closed our big office in Camberley, and we've quadrupled the size of our office in Gatwick. We've invested in the office to make it a nicer place, a nicer environment, because we do want people to come back. And my side bet is give it a couple of years and I'm going to have to find more space, because I think people over time will gradually drift back. I'm not saying 5 days a week, because I think there are great benefits of the home working. But I do think, particularly for the younger people at the start of their career, they value the social side of it. We value the fact that we can help coach and train and make interventions. So I actually think it's a really good thing. I think the hybrid thing is a real opportunity. And fundamentally, it comes back to this word I used earlier. It's trust. You either trust your employees or you don't. If you don't, well, they shouldn't be working for you, or you shouldn't be working for the company. Overall, our employees have returned that trust. If anything, there's probably evidence that they're working harder and longer than when they were in the office. But so I think that's our model. But we're in 86 countries, so typical Rentokil, we're 86 countries, probably got 87 different ways of doing it. But there's not one size here. But that's the UK model, and I think it's a good one.
Thank you. Now moving on to leadership, I'd just like to explore a little bit about what skills and experience you've found helpful to you through this crisis. And looking back, I know that you've experienced other crises, and when you were at ICI, you were part of the leadership there, did some amazing things, and then through your time with Rentokil. So just wondering if there are things that from the past that have applied to this crisis, or if things have been very different. Could you just tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, sure, Caroline. Well, my background, I'm a lawyer by background and training, and you already know now I did 20 years at ICI. And I don't know, but it feels like mine is a career that has been punctuated by crises. It feels like I've spent more time in crisis than I'm out of crisis at some times. I think the story that you're referring to probably was back in, when was this now, 95, 96. There was a a horrific incident, which was the Oklahoma City bomb. 168 people, many of them children, were killed by a terrorist incident. McVeigh and Nichols, has just been the 25th anniversary just a couple of months ago. And those who are of an age will remember Johnny Cochran, who was the lawyer that defended O.J. Simpson. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. Johnny filed a lawsuit against ICI because the bomb that had been detonated outside the building, the Oklahoma Federal Building, was made out of fertilizer, and the fertilizer was manufactured by ICI, and he brought a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against ICI in a very emotional case in the names of the 168 souls that died on that day, and it was a massive lawsuit and a huge problem for us. And I was in the office back in the day when faxes were a thing, and I walked past the fax machine. This fax was rolling up and rolling up and rolling on. I just picked it up and looked at it, and this was this lawsuit. Now I'm a corporate lawyer, a British corporate lawyer, not a litigator, and I looked at it and I had this, oh my God, this is horrific. This is a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. And I went into my boss's office and I said, this has just come in. And the next sentence I said is, I want to run this. I want to do the defence. And that started a 5-year journey. I moved the family to Canada. I then moved the family to America and spent 5 years defending, even though I wasn't a litigator, defending the company against this incredibly worrying lawsuit. I remember at the time somebody famously, it's famous in my mind anyways, famously saying, so let's get this right, they've got Johnny Cochran and we've got you, which was really rather reassuring. Anyway, that was my big crisis management moment, and the crisis went on for several years, because had we lost that lawsuit, that would have threatened the entire existence of the company. And at the time, we then had 2 other multi-billion lawsuits kick off unrelated to Oklahoma City, and I ended up running those as well. So I do a bit of internal training for teams at RI, and I won't perhaps use the same language I would use with them, but I have this theory that when it all hits the fan, people do one of 2 things. They either take a step backwards or they take a step forwards. And so my advice to all my team has always been, when that moment happens, when that moment of high drama, high crisis, something goes horribly wrong, take a step towards it. Be part of the solution to that. It makes for a much more interesting career, and it's amazing how you see, different types of what you've really seen in your managers. Those who don't want to be part of this, those who want to, slip into the background, and those who actually are quite happy to get stuck in and roll their sleeves up and be part of sorting it out. And I think that, for me, that sort of slightly masochistic approach to when something bad happens, you go to it, and it's the same in business. Bad set of numbers, you don't leave it and hope something's going to, you get involved and get. I always say to my teams, don't be defined by your job title. It doesn't matter what it says on your card. You're an employee of the company. You're a member of the team. You get involved. It doesn't matter if you're in Treasury or in legal or in. Get involved, volunteer, be part of that, and that's what I've always liked in the organisations that I've worked in, that people can just be part of that solution. So that's my, I got loads of crises stories I could share with you, and I don't want to depress everyone, but that was the big moment, and I learned a huge amount about resilience and about how to personally deal with stress and all of those things. So I felt I'll say ready when this one came along. I was sort of sitting. I've never seen a pandemic certainly not a global one. But it felt like, yeah, I know, you know, the muscle memory of what you need to do in this situation was there, and that certainly helped me get through it.
They say also that in terms of leadership, there's often two types of CEOs. There's the ones that are really good in crises, and there's the ones who are really good when, you know, when it's all stable. And the ones that like crises get itchy feet or want to shake things up when it's stable, and the stable ones don't cope so well in crisis. But it doesn't strike me that you fit necessarily into only one of those camps. But what would you say?
I don't know where we're going with this question, Caroline. This could go anywhere, couldn't it? No, I don't know. It's difficult to answer. I mean, I think most CEOs have a restlessness. I think most CEOs, they should do anyway. This sort of continuous improvement gene. This, you know, and I sort of describe it a different way. I look around my management team, and with all the great talk of you should have diversity of thought. I'm not talking about gender or race or diversity of thought. I seem to have surrounded myself with a bunch of people that seem to have the same deep-seated paranoia and fear of failure, and that's you know, and there's studies have been written on this stuff, and that's my driver to keep on improving. It's not because I want to show someone, look how good I am, or look how good the organisation is. I'm actually scared of screwing it up, and so this drive of we've got to keep improving. We've got to keep, and my management team is very, very similar. We do detail. That's another common feature. So we're constantly mining the data. We're looking for things. We're looking for the next problem that's going to happen. So that restlessness, that drive to improve, that continuous improvement, I think most CEOs have a bit of that. I think, you know, some of us are a bit more extreme than others. I don't yearn a crisis, God no. I yearn, you know, to play more golf. You know, and my golf is bad enough as it is. You know, I yearn to, you know, go out to Portugal. Only they hadn't just turned it amber yesterday. But so no, I do recognise that need to just keep, not shake it up. I don't like that. Actually, quite the opposite. I vote for stability, and if I look at my management team, nobody's left in years, and I love that. You know, it could be tomorrow's problem, but today, I love the fact that we've got a really stable team, and they've got tenure, which means they do know how to get things done. They do know what to do in a crisis, and so this constant churning of senior management is not, you know, sometimes you do need to do it, but it's not my brand of religion. No, not at all.
Well, I like that, and thanks for answering that so well. Really, really interesting. It's fascinating hearing, you know, that you know, how you think and how you do things, and your team, and that tenure. And you said maybe it'd be a problem in the future, but it's obviously doing well for you at the moment. There's a good book called The Psychopath Test by John Ronson. It's quite fun, and John Ronson draws the parallel between psychopaths as we would think about them, you know, the axe-murdering type of psychopath, and then psychopathic profiles, and number one on the list of psychopathic profiles is lawyer, and number two is CEO. So, you know, ask my wife. So there's an element of, and it's not the you know, the axe-murdering type of psychopathy, but there's an element in a lot of CEOs to some of that, those behaviour traits. So worth a read if you get a chance. Oh, I certainly will. Thank you very much. Now, we're just moving on to sustainability and ESG, big topics at the moment, of course. What measures is Rentokil Initial taking in order to build a sustainable future? Yeah, look, I'd say sustainability, I think, has, of all
themes in business, I've been in business 35 years, is without doubt the biggest and the most universal and the most urgent that I've ever seen, and it's real as opposed to some of the others which are a bit more transient. So I think this is really incredibly serious, and I think business is taking it incredibly seriously. But I still think, here's the cynic in me, I still think we've got a bunch of people that think sustainability has got something to do with, can they put the right story in their annual report? Can they, I'll give you an example of what sustainability is not. A big company selling a coal mine to another company who will run that coal mine is not sustainability. That has done nothing for the planet, makes them feel good, makes them look good. That doesn't meet my definition. Sustainability means you've actually got to solve some of these problems, and you've got to be part of solving it. So in Rentokil, if we look at our carbon footprint, we've done the easy thing. We're carbon net neutral already. We've done a scheme with an amazing charity called Cool Earth a few years ago, and so that's the easy bit that makes us feel good, but it's important. We're preserving rainforest in Papua New Guinea and helping communities around the world preserving rainforest. That isn't what I'm talking about. If you look at our carbon footprint, we've made our COP26 2040 net neutral commitment. Our carbon footprint splits into really two areas. One is all the stuff that we do, all of the miles that we drive on the road in our vans, all of the fuel that we burn in our offices, all of that, all of the chemical that goes into the product that's used to deal with the rodents and all the insects. And then we have fumigant gases. So we use gases to kill bugs in grain silos. If you didn't kill the bugs in grain, you would have no grain supply for the world. So if we look at that, we don't do much. We're a £3 billion revenue company. We do about $50 million of fumigation around the world. It's tiny for us, yet it accounts for 50% of our carbon footprint. Is that so? I could do the easy thing. I could get out of fumigation and halve our carbon footprint. But all I would be doing is handing that fumigation to someone else, because there is no solution at the moment. So what we're trying to do is come up working with scientists, working with chemical companies, working with alternative technologies. Can we find a different way of fumigating foodstuffs, for example, that doesn't involve those damaging gases or involves a dramatic reduction in them? If we can do that, that's environmental leadership. That is sustainable business. So that's the philosophy. But back to my flywheel and my cogs earlier. The cog that comes next to, if we go this way around the wheel, comes right next to employees, is actually sustainability. So what we've done in RI is talk about the business case for sustainability. You can either get with the program because it's the right thing to do, and you should do that in any event, but much more powerful if you can make money from it. And back to the key cog in our wheel is employees. Employees want to work for good companies today. Customers want to buy from good companies. Governments want to support good companies. Investors want to invest in good companies. Lenders want to lend to good companies, green finance, etc. So the business case for sustainability, in my view, is incontrovertible. It's incredibly powerful. But if that's the way you think about it, you've got a much higher chance of delivering on these very ambitious targets. And I worry a little bit that some people out there are saying they're going to meet these targets and haven't got the first clue as to how they're going to do it, and they're going to leave it all to 2049. But so our approach is we've got 8 work streams. They've all got targets. They've all got KPIs. We'll report on them. And each year we will hopefully demonstrate we are getting that much closer to the end objective. But I'd say incredibly important issue and very powerful. But for us, it's also part of how do we go on, driving the business forward and creating the value for our shareholders. We do it by being the best at what we do and leading an environment.
Well, sadly, Andy, sadly for me, because I'm really enjoying this, we're going to have to close now. But do you have maybe a message to our audience, something that you'd like to share, a piece of advice or?
I suppose, as it's the ACT, I'll try and be slightly relevant, more than I've done for the last 40 minutes perhaps, but I'll slightly relevant. Well, the first thing, I think we all owe it to ourselves to learn from this crisis. And I think governments haven't yet even considered the policy response to what's gone on, and they have to. But companies also need to look back and see, well, what worked really well for us, but what didn't work. And as I said, it's not about risk registers and BCPs. It's what processes worked, what functions worked, what people worked, and where it didn't work as well as you wanted it to, what can you do about it now? Because there will be another crisis along at some point. So that, I think, is practical advice. Don't miss the opportunity to learn from the last 12 months and to do something about it. So that would be my first advice. The other one, more in the ACT piece, and I don't want to be gloomy because I don't know whether you guys, worry about these things or just rub your hands. But I do think for the younger people out there in the profession that haven't seen inflation, and for the younger people out there that haven't seen interest rate rises, I'm not going to be a harbinger of gloom and doom here and say that massive inflation is coming and massive interest rate rises are coming. But I would say be prepared for more inflation than we've seen in the past, and I would say be prepared for interest rate rises that are more than 25 basis points here or there. I think when the bill that the world has written to respond to the pandemic has to be paid at some point. All of the fiscal measures that have been taken and the support measures that have been taken have to be paid for at some point. And my instinct is that we will see inflation and we will see interest rate rises. And therefore, as I say, if you haven't been through an inflationary environment and you don't know what, I remember my first mortgage at 14.75% and negative equity and all of those happy days. I'm not saying we're going to have massive inflation. But I do think that is a scenario that I think people should be planning for and thinking their way through, particularly if they're loading their balance sheet up with cheap debt. That cheap debt ain't so cheap when the interest rate hikes start to come. So that's common sense. But look, I think take some of the thoughts, be as relevant as you can to the organisation. Don't be defined by your job title. You've got more to offer than just being your Treasury brilliance. And be great team players as you typically are. But good luck with it all. Well,
thanks very much, Andy. I know some of our senior treasurers would agree they have similar worries about younger treasurers not having experienced some of the things that they have from the past. But we do try in our training to give a comprehensive view and make sure people are prepared for anything. But excellent advice. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience. So it's goodbye from myself and Andy Ransom in our London studio. And we hope to see you back with us soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.